Good evening and welcome to The Pipeline. I'm Cory Morgan. This is the Western Standard's weekly news and affairs panel show where we'll pick a few of the top stories and dissect them, analyze them, give our viewpoints on them. So today I am joined by, start and the end there with our news editor, Dave Naylor. Thanks for joining us for The Pipeline this week, Dave.
You know, I'm starting to notice a pattern here, Cory. You and Nigel and I working, nice hot summer day. Where's Derek? Where's Derek? I'm always filling in for Derek in the summer.
I'm certain it was something terribly important.
Very important, I'm sure.
And as well, loyally showing up on such a beautiful day, our opinion editor, Nigel Hannaford. Thanks for making it into the studio today.
I've timed my vacation so that I don't miss a pipeline.
Oh, well, and our viewers appreciate that. I'm sure they're all wondering when the heck that Morgan guy is going to give them a break for a little while. I'm sure it'll happen. I tend to escape in wintertime. So we got a full raft of stuff to cover today. Before we get into all those subjects and all that chatter, I'll start with reminding everybody, though, that we aren't taking the tax bailouts. We aren't putting the screws to the social media companies through C18, but you've got to subscribe to us to keep us going, guys. That's the way we pay the bills. That's how we stay independent. westernstandard.news/membership, $9.99 a month, guys. Less than newspaper delivery used to be. All sorts of direct access, stories, opinion, great content, but also we're going to be harder to find. The social media outlets are starting to block access to the news. So make sure to favorite us in your browser, on your phone, sign up for the email lists, make sure you can keep getting to the Western Standard and spread the word because we need to get out to other viewers, readers, listeners. And if we can't do it through the social media platforms, we need to do it through you. So take a little part, share it with your friends, put it on your own pages, and help us keep that news going and out to you. All right, we're going to start with a big one, and it's been just rocking the website the last little while. Unsurprisingly, the Court of King's Bench, still sounds strange saying that. It's going to take a while to get used to that, has rejected Hinshaw's public health orders. Dave, what happened?
Well, you're right, Cory. This is a blockbuster, and it's going to cause legal waves for months, if not years. Court of King's Bench justice threw out of all of Dr. Dina Hinshaw's COVID orders, basically saying that it was the cabinet that decided it. Should have come directly from her, but no, it was basically Jason Kenney and his cabinet that came up with them. So she's the justice has thrown them all out. They're now moot. Just some of the backlashes. Remember they were throwing pastors in jail. James Coates. The Pulowski family, they were there. It was crazy. The people that they were locking up. All those charges are now irrelevant, and obviously the Crown's going to have to consider their next step. Things like the No More Lockdown Rodeo with our good friend Ty Northcott. He's still before the courts, and his wife with a whole raft of charges. They're all moot now. So. Western Standard spoke to the Justice Minister today, Mickey Amery. He says they're going to take it's a complex ruling, and they've got 30 days to decide whether or not they're going to appeal. And I'm sure they're going to use all 30 days, Cory.
Well, yeah, Nigel, just to dive into the political end of this problem, and it's now become a problem that's landed on the Smiths government's lap, because Premier Smith has really built a lot of her base, though, in supporting the people who were upset with the lockdowns and such. They're going to be very happy with this ruling. But the government could find itself very, very vulnerable to a lot of legal actions and distress if this ruling stands. So, she's between a rock and a hard place. If she appeals this, her base is going to go bananas. But if she doesn't appeal this could cost untold amounts of time and money.
Well, it certainly could. I think this is one she'd be glad to lose, and there is an obligation upon the government always to challenge rulings that seem to go against it. Possibly she could get some advice that says you actually don't have a case, madam. Do yourself and the taxpayers a favor and don't invest a lot of money in fighting it. But, the thing that really strikes me about this one is I'm very glad for the pastors involved. you know, for James Coates, for Tim Stevens, for, you mentioned the Pulaski family, Ty Northcote and the road. I'm glad for them. Looks like they're off the hook. But from the larger point of view of what have they just done to us in COVID? This is a win on a technicality. It is not the win that I would like to have seen, which would have been one based on the Charter of Rights and Freedoms, namely that what was done was unconstitutional. I mean, that's what I believe. I think there's a lot of people who believe that with me. I'm not sure that's what the courts believe, but in this particular case, what they struck down was if those were not, if she distanced herself in her testimony from her own rulings. Well, those are my recommendations. And it was the cabinet that did it. Well, all right, I guess they're not really proper public health orders, are they? And case dismissed.
Yes, yes.
That's great for those who benefit from it, and it'll be great for anybody who sues and wins a lottery. But as somebody wanting to see liberty, freedom established, confirmed, this is not the way I wanted to see it. I wanted them to rule on the Charter of Rights, say that they did not actually have the right to do what they did. We don't have that.
Oh, so they didn't say the restrictions were wrong. They're just saying that the way the restrictions were done was wrong. And that presumably was in order to say we could still do it again down the road, but now don't do it this way. Make sure that you communicate it that way. But I mean, it's still open to hornet's nest. I imagine some other provinces have to be watching this ruling as well. I mean, how did they do that?
Well, there will be a certain amount of thumbing back through the, well, just a second. Did we sign this or did they sign it? Yeah.
Right now, it's lawyers whose eyes are lighting up.
Oh, yeah.
Can you imagine the amount or the number of people that could sue the province? Everybody who's lost their job due to vaccine mandates, you know, from police officers to firefighters to teachers, nurses. It's endless. I mean, you talk about, you know, billions and billions of dollars worth of class action suits. So, I mean, you know, Nigel's right. Is the government going to fight it just to try and prevent that loss to the Treasury? Because, you know, I mean, the lawyers are signing up clients as we speak.
And there's a lot of damages that are difficult to measure.
Mhm.
You know, what about once in a lifetime incidents, graduations, weddings,
Funerals.
You can't have a redo on those sorts of things, but where do you put a price tag on something like that? People will have a very valid case to bring before the government and say, well, you can't turn the clock back, but darn it, I want some compensation for the distress you put us through.
And politically, fallout for Premier Smith is a lot of the cabinet ministers in Kenny's government who signed off on these things are now in her government. What does she do with them?
It's a sticky thing. I guess the only consolation she could take is the agonizingly slow pace of our court system. I mean, it's going to be years as this continues to drag out, but the precedent it's set right now. Well, I guess we'll know in a month, though, what they're going to appeal. That's something they can't drag their feet on.
You know, what she can say is, look, I knew this was wrong when they were doing it. I said it was wrong. And now my predecessors have left me this time bomb. As Premier of the province, I have no alternative but to do what's constitutionally expected of me, which is to appeal this. And we will. But I do so with no enthusiasm and with a certain amount of smug superiority. And I called this thing right in the first place. We'll do what we have to do, but if we lose, well, that's...
Certainly tell you've written some political speeches before. But I mean, it's true, and just hedging the bets. And I mean, she is taking on multiple roles from her past critique, but now she's got a broader responsibility as the premier for the whole province. And,
like if she does not appeal, she's making a political statement.
Yeah.
And that's a statement a lot of people would agree with, but she would expose her to the charge that she was not doing her constitutional duty. And I would put it in the hands of somebody else and talk about something more pleasant.
Yeah, well, as Dave said, the lawyers are rubbing their hands together on every level
Oh,
of this,
yes.
particularly the class action ones, but even government ones. You got a lot of security coming when you know that there's going to be. It'd probably be a good time to hire more courts judges right now.
What do you do with somebody who's been a policeman for 20 years, won't take the vaccine that was ordered apparently by Dina Hinshaw, but in fact not? You know, there's a pretty substantial claim for loss of income, loss of reputation. Because let's face it, if you were a holdout on vaccination, people just didn't say, well, to each their own. They actually condemned you. You are an enemy of the people.
Vilified on social media.
Yeah.
And proving damages. I know.
Snatcher of pennies from the eyes of the dead. You know, there was no thing that was too vile for them to say about you if you had a principal objection to taking the vaccine on the orders of the government.
Well, the vaccine passports were the big controversial thing, not just from the people coerced into vaccination, but as a former restaurant owner, I think I wouldn't have wanted that in the front of my restaurant, having my hostesses barraged with the complaints and the customers being upset. And there's no doubt that it had a negative impact on my revenue as a business owner. So yes, lawyers, I'm sure, looking for more areas for your class actions. Reach out to
Sign
the
up
retail
those
and restaurant
hostesses,
areas,
yes.
well, the restaurants that
You're right.
claim lost revenue because of the vaccine passport. I mean, even if you supported it, when you no longer can, you know, with the 10 or 20% of people or whatever who weren't vaccinated, that's lost customer base.
You know, since you raised the matter, Cory, of restaurants, this is one of the things that is going to make this case a very difficult one to resolve, is that regulations varied among the provinces. So, restaurants, you say, in British Columbia, because of this virus, they shut the churches but closed the restaurant. Kept the restaurants open. In Alberta, they did the exact opposite. You know?
Yeah.
So
it's not consistency.
So whoever is fighting this case is saying, well, why did you do what you did? They did it differently somewhere else. In Quebec, we had curfews. In Alberta, you didn't. On what basis were these decisions made? Nobody's going to come out of this looking good.
No, the COVID's not behind us. And I'm not talking about the people saying we should still mask up and everything. Just the fallout from the actions are going to go on for years and years to come.
Well, you know, with the masks, Cory, I think we've got to take a very live and let live sort of attitude about it. I was out and about and I saw people in the open air in a big parking lot going to a shopping mall, got the mask on. You know, I don't know what their circumstances are. Maybe they're,
as long as it's not mandated,
as long as it's
wear
not
whatever
mandated,
you want. Yeah,
you know, it's to each their own. But that was never conceded to people who were anti-mask or anti-vaccine while this thing was going on. And there's a lot of ill feelings that the judges will need to consider when they're handing out the judgments.
The hornet's nest has been poked. I guess we'll keep watching and covering as it unfolds. All right. Well, before we get to the next subject, I'll speak of another group that does stand up for your rights, actually, and takes legal challenges, non-COVID related, and that's the Canadian Shooting Sports Association. They've been a fantastic sponsor for the Standard. They're a fantastic group for anybody who owns firearms, whether you collect them, you're a hunter, you're a target shooter. It doesn't really matter. You don't have to justify why you own them, but you have people saying that you shouldn't. You have a government that's trying to take them away. The CSSA has been fighting on your behalf to make sure you can maintain that right to that property and enjoying that property however you please within reason. So again, if you aren't a member of the CSSA yet and you have firearms or you just want to support other people with firearms, get on there, guys. It's worth it. It's an investment in your own rights. Canadian Shooting Sports Association. Their website is CSSA-CILA.org. There's all kinds of resources there too. It's not just legal stuff. If you're a firearms owner, all sorts of things there for you. So check it out. Take out a membership. You'll not be sorry for it. Okay, next. Chrystia Freeland. Always a fun subject. One of our more senior politicians. Boy, she seems to have gotten herself into quite a mess over her transportation, Dave.
She absolutely has. She was at a press conference down in the Maritimes, and a local reporter asked her about the carbon tax and how much that's shot up the amount of gasoline and how it's affecting people down there, and what was her reaction and how should people deal with it. And she got on her high horse and said, well, you know, I live in Toronto. I live 150 feet from the subway. I don't drive a car. And if you're worried about fuel taxes, come move to Toronto and buy $1 million house and live next to the subway and don't buy a car. And she went on about how she cycles to work and cycles to meetings. But ironically, Cory, the next day, chauffeur receipts started to appear from her limo rides in said Toronto. And it wasn't just one or two. It was the chauffeur was billed for numerous days. Most of the days in the month, actually, I think. And it showed the utter lack of, I don't know what the word is. Nigel, help me out here.
Well,
You're the
hypocrisy
speechwriter.
was
Hypocrisy.
springs to mind.
The hypocrisy of looking down your nose and in your weird Chrystia Freeland voice saying, well, I don't have a car. And
I
then
live like 300 meters.
like she's talking like a valley girl.
Senior finance minister, politician using the word like a teenager.
And I don't think anybody's begrudging Chrystia Freeland. She's the deputy prime minister and the finance minister of a G7 country. She probably has every right to a limousine wherever she wants to go. But don't be condescending to people and say, I don't drive a car. I take the subway. I ride my bike. I mean, come on. And Canadians saw through it immediately.
Yeah, you're exactly right, Dave. I mean, you cannot have a finance minister with her briefcase full of secret documents going on the bus or on the subway, even in a cab. I have my doubts. Although she says she takes a cab to the airport. That there is a lot of mean-spirited comment by people. We had a similar outburst over the Governor General. I don't like it, but I recognize that the Governor General often doesn't have a lot of choices in where she stays or who supplies the limousine or what it costs. I recognize that in the same way. The Deputy Prime Minister, Finance Minister Chrystia Freeland is not only merits an official car when she needs one, but actually should take one for all kinds of reasons, not limited to security. But don't try to tell us that she is doing some noble thing and that she doesn't even own a car. If you can call up the pool and say, send me an Escalade, you don't need a car, do you?
No, and I mean, even Mary Simon didn't at least, say that she takes the bus or the cab. I mean, part of the problem too is it sounds like she was feeding us BS, or she's just that disconnected. Christia Antoinette, as Dave sort of said, just buy a house near a station in an urban area, and you can just, get rid of your Disney Channel, and you're fine.
Cake, for heaven's sake. No, I actually don't think she is disconnected. I think she's perfectly aware of her situation. But I also think she thinks she can tell the narrative her way. I mean, this is all about supporting the green agenda. Oh no, I'm pure. When I ride my bike to work, well, okay, maybe once or twice a month you do. If you did it once or twice a week, good for you. I think you're taking a chance if you've got a box of cabinet documents on the back, on the pillion, but never mind.
And there is history of cabinet ministers leaving documents behind, right?
Yes,
There was a
one had a biker girlfriend,
Maxime
if I recall.
Bernier, if I remember.
That's right.
And
Using
British
foreign
politicians
affairs.
are always getting caught, losing stuff on the tube. So you really don't want Canadian politicians who have to carry top secret documents. You don't want them on the subway.
It's just the lies and the dishonesty of it all.
Oh, it is,
And
absolutely.
you see it everywhere, and here's another one.
Well, that's the politics, as we know. I mean, people keep bringing up the old orange juice thing. It's not really necessarily the cost, but how it's resonating with people, and something the Liberals don't seem to quite have grasped yet, I think. With the recent polling we talked about last week, they're dropping quite heavily, and they're losing among women and young people who that poll also identified by far the biggest concern for everybody in Canada, like number one listed, is the cost of living. The environment is way down at like sixth place at about 30%. We're talking 70-some% of people looked at the cost of living. So these people aren't comforted when they hear her say, oh, well, I ride my bike to save the environment. They're worried about paying the rent. They're worried about affording a car.
These people have been in power for 10 years. It's not as though they're a new government just learning, right? Chrystia Freeland's been Deputy Prime Minister and Finance Minister for ages now. She's not a rookie politician,
No,
so
she's not.
we can't say she should know better. So it was just dumb.
But
It
people
was
have
it was dumb.
even less appetite for that sort of behavior. You know, when the economy's really good and everything's booming, people might be able to overlook a little more excesses going on. But you know, you've got to watch your timing. And right now is not a time when people are willing to accept a lot of these things right now.
This is ever so slightly off topic, but it is very interesting to look back at the cabinet shuffle, which she survived intact, and realize that the problem as the Prime Minister sees it, think about what he said. He said, people who can better articulate our vision going forward. He doesn't say, no, actually, some of our policies have really not worked out the way we intended, and we need a new team to do things differently and hopefully do it better. He didn't say that. As far as he's concerned, policies are great. It's all how they're messaged. So this is the team that is going to communicate our government strategies and policies as we run up to the next election. Oh, so it's not the policies, it's just the messaging. And this, I think, is, to bring it back to Chrystia Freeland, this is precisely the problem. It is one of messaging.
Yeah, it wasn't a good messaging out of this. And again, she is a veteran politician, cabinet minister, and she is one of the brighter ones I would concede in Trudeau's cabinet, actually. She's typically not one to stick her foot in her mouth, you know, too much. But this one didn't do herself any favors this week.
No. Yeah, she's...
All right, something on a little more of a darker and serious note. A trucking company. It was ordered to reinstate a drunk driver. You know, we've had some of the worst tragedies from truckers, and you know, I mean, they're large units. They're moving fast. A lot of people can be harmed. The last place you'd want to see a drunk, but apparently you have the right to be a drunken alcoholic truck driver.
According to a Quebec tribunal, you do. This was a woman driving a semi. Admitted she'd had 9 beers before she got into an accident, but the adjudicator said, well, the company didn't take into consideration the fact that she was an alcoholic, and she should have got help for that, and it was up to the company to find her basically a desk job, you know, and she was ordered to be reinstated. This goes back to what you talked about today on your show, Cory, about personal responsibility in dealing with crime, and how little there seems to be, and it seems to be our legal system is now agreeing with it and letting this drunk truck driver off, ordering her to get her job back. Hey, Nigel, you were driving trucks on your Model Ford T on the old Alaska Highway, weren't you? You wouldn't be driving.
Hard to believe, but
beer.
it's 50 years ago now.
50 years,
Yeah.
wow.
Driving for Short Tompkins, a sailor on the Muskeg Seas. But, you know, obviously alcohol was a problem in those days as well, but it was not tolerated. If it came to light, it was dealt with, and you were off the job. Simple as that. It's just too much of a risk, not merely to the person who's driving drunk, but to everybody else around you. I mean, the work we were on was putting up and taking down drilling rigs. That's actually dangerous stuff. One false move. Not to mention the fact that later you've got to haul the thing a couple of 100 miles somewhere else. And in this particular case that we're talking about, she was driving on a highway in Pennsylvania. Imagine what had happened. Imagine the story if she had hit a K car full of, with a family of 7 or something like that, and they're all dead, and she's poured out of the cab. It is absolute insanity to say that she should not have been fired, and that they have to make her a job. Now, it is legal. Same thing would happen in Alberta. If one of us is an alcoholic, and we register as such, then it's up to the owner of the company, and he's going to love this, but it's up to the owner of the company to help you get treatment and keep you going and so forth and so on. That's the way the law has developed. But what it really tells you is just how asinine the law has become and our society has become, where nobody is held accountable for what they do, sometimes for what they think, but never for what they do.
And it's a dangerous precedent. I mean, alcoholism, I'm very familiar with it, and it doesn't absolve an individual of responsibility. If there's any area where, I mean, the company would have been irresponsible to keep her on.
Exactly.
A justifiable dismissal. She was not just doing something dangerous, she was doing something outright illegal while on company time. If she'd been robbing banks on company time, they could have fired her. I just, this excuse with it. I mean, it's certainly something that I'm sympathetic. It's difficult to deal with. A person needs treatment. A person needs a lot of, hopefully, family support to get through alcoholism. But that's not the company's problem, and it shouldn't be.
And you've been open, right? It's
Yes.
personal responsibility, right? You took responsibility when you talked about it, when you decided you were an alcoholic, you took responsibility and you stopped, and you haven't drank since.
Or I accepted I was an alcoholic. It took a number of false starts, and it takes some time. And thankfully, I hadn't done something as foolish as drinking in the field and put somebody at risk and hurt themselves. I was just getting myself wasted at night, but it still wasn't good. I wasn't performing 100% actually during the day. A hangover is still actually quite. You're not performing well. But I get frustrated with these sorts of things where it basically, again, is just putting it on the lap of the employer. I mean, put it on her to dry out, prove yourself dry, reapply to that company or find another one. I mean, I don't believe she'd have a life sentence because she was irresponsible, but to force the employer to take on somebody who's done that is just not.
The ironies of it are that if things had gone differently and she had killed somebody, this is a good case for Mothers Against Drunk Driving and the other advocacy organizations to say we need to crack down on it. Well, all right, let's say I agree with you. You need to crack down on it. This is cracking down. Give her a job back.
No, so we'll keep you in the office so you can still keep drinking, but you won't kill anybody while you're at it. Until she defecates her own liver out and drops. I mean, this is a person who should be encouraged into dealing with the problem, not facilitated. But it gets back to that enablement attitude we've got with addicts in general. I mean, alcohol's an addiction, and guys, you got to stop it when you're addicted. There's no halfway.
No, and what the tribunal's decision did was just to enable her to continue doing what she did.
Well, I don't know what it's going to take to turn around, or if it will. As Nigel said, that's the way the laws are. It frustrated me as a bar owner. I mean, you get that drilled into you as well. If a person is overserved, I'm on the hook as a bar owner. My staff might be on the hook as a bar owner if they go out and hurt themselves. Now, if I'd seen them, they don't allow any room for judgment, though. If I'd have seen them stumbling with their face against the table and I allowed them 3 more shots of tequila, yes, I'm being irresponsible. If they got 6 shots of tequila before they even came to my bar, I have no idea. And we've seen court cases where that's happened. People traveled to go bar hopping and ended up suing every bar they'd went to because they went and got into a drunken accident and hurt themselves. Do we need a justice reform to stop this? Like, how do we take this? This is...
How do you teach personal responsibility? That's the question. Hey, maybe there's something wrong with me because I went to 4 bars, had 3 shots of tequila in each one, and then drove and killed somebody. Where do I learn that personal responsibility? Is it a parental role? School role?
Well, I actually, since you mentioned school, I do think that's where you start, that and in the home, teaching responsibility, but there is so little support for it in the system that we work in, the legal system, the work system. Every excuse is given, and then when something dreadful happens, they just say, "Oh, well, that shouldn't be allowed." Well, right, it shouldn't. Maybe we start earlier.
Well, and they're cracking down on the responsible. That frustrates me. It's bad enough. Say if somebody, that case, I wish I'd have thought of this in advance. I'd have pulled it up because there was a bad one. A woman had gone place, and sued them all. And just a double punishment of the bar did nothing
Right.
wrong.
Yeah.
There was another case in Ontario I saw with an idiot who got drunk. He was drinking with coworkers. So after bar closing, and they went to a park, drank some more. He went to another bar somewhere, drank some more. And then he tried diving into some water, and it turned out it was only a foot or two deep and had a concrete bottom. You might remember he broke his
Yeah, I
neck.
remember
He was a
that, yeah.
paraplegic. He sued his coworkers. He sued every bar he'd been to. He'd sued the city for not putting signs out to warn him that the water was shallow. Now, having an irresponsible fool suing everybody around him, that doesn't shock me. What shocks me is the judge let him win every single bit of it. He bankrupted his coworkers, he shut down the bars, and he hit the city for a bunch of money. Like, this is ludicrous, and this was some years ago.
Yeah, look, I think I'm pretty sure we've all got every sympathy for somebody who finds themselves addicted.
Mhm.
I don't think anybody sets out with the idea that I am going to make myself into an addict so that I can do whatever I like and not be held accountable. So whatever it was that drove this woman to drink, so be it. But it wasn't even a bar involved. She loaded up with 2 six-packs before she stuffed it in gear and headed off down the highway. That's a pretty intentional act. And it wasn't until a week after the accident that she fessed up and said, well, yeah, I guess probably I am. This is what the story says anyway, that maybe I'm an alcoholic after all. Well, loading up a 12 beer, heading out down the highway with it, drink 9 of them before you hit something. Yeah, there were clues there.
Yeah, and you can't pretend that there weren't already policies, or I didn't know, the company didn't make it clear to me that I'm not supposed to drink and drive. I mean, nobody with a driver's license in Canada is unaware that you are not to be driving whilst drunk.
Right.
No, so admit you're an alcoholic, get the treatment you need, and as you said, go apply again, right?
Something else that might be frustrating, maybe she's not an alcoholic and she just went on a one-time bender, but she used that as an excuse because it gained more sympathy when it comes to trying to get your job. But it's just, again, we're indulging the irresponsible. Where will it end? All right, well, let's turn the page a little and get on to some federal provincial fighting, always a favorite subject of mine anyways, and it's really been ripping things up quite a bit. It looks like with the big housing initiative, we're having housing affordability problems. The federal government is putting out big transfers and big programs to try and keep everybody housed affordably, but Alberta got a little shortchanged.
Alberta screwed by the feds?
How
Who would
unusual.
have thunk it? Who would have thunk it? This time it's with housing. It's cost the province in tens of millions of dollars in transfer payments. And Minister Nixon pointed it out today at a press conference in Calgary on Tuesday. I think, what did you say, Cory? Alberta's got 12% of the country's population and only got 2% of the grants, shortchanging him. It was more than $100 million to build affordable housing. And there's, affordable housing is an absolutely crucial issue at the moment. And Alberta's getting screwed by the feds once again. I know your eyes lit up because you could probably sell some more books, but it's how often does it have to happen? It's a repeated pattern, and it's happened again with housing this time.
I mean, you can see the government, it's a handy tool to buy political favor in regions where they gain more benefit from support than others. And, to be honest, they've got little to gain or lose in Alberta, so I don't think they really care if they shortchanges.
I would say no. One of the irritating things in the last week has been watching Mr. Trudeau say, well, housing, that's not really a federal responsibility. Strictly speaking, looking at it from a college politics 101 student textbook example, yeah, well, it isn't a federal responsibility, but what he chooses to ignore, and of which he's perfectly well aware, is that it is the policies, the financial policies that the federal government has followed that has put us in this situation. If you borrow hundreds of millions of dollars and increase the national debt, cause inflation, drive up interest rates, guess what? You have just made it more difficult for people to buy houses. So it's a knock-on effect of what they have already been doing. If you also, at the same time, hugely inflate the supply by ramping up the number of immigrants, now let me say, for those who are watching our words to see whether we're saying something, not anti-immigrant. I am an immigrant. However, if you ramp up the demand on a limited supply, you will drive up prices. And if you do drive up those prices with your increased immigration and with your stupid financial policies, then all of a sudden, if somebody can't buy a house in Toronto, can't find a house that they can afford in Vancouver, can't find something that they could at least get started with in Calgary, yeah, it's a federal problem. And it's yours, sir.
And just look at the streets of Toronto today. Refugees coming to this country for a better life, being forced to live on the street in tent cities because they have nowhere to go. They can't afford. There's no affordable housing for them because it's not being built, and that is in the lap of the feds. And you're 100% right, and it's only going to get worse. Right, because you've got this 500,000 refugees coming, and immigrant too, right? So where are you going to put them?
Where did this guy come from?
I sprouted out of the ground out here in Alberta, so I didn't come from very far.
But where are you going to put them all, right? Where are they going to live?
You realize you're a minority.
I can live with that. White men are a minority now.
Yeah.
But it's just logistics. It's not pro or anti-immigration when it gets to this point. You bring people in, they need a home. This is a winter country. This could become a very big crisis very soon. But not only is the cause, as you pointed out, there's some responsibility because bad federal policy has raised our cost of living. But he's assumed responsibility how can you say in one hand, okay, it's not my responsibility for this, but I'm going to create a program with hundreds of millions of tax dollars and disperse it. Well, now you've assumed some responsibility then, and that responsibility should have been dispersing it based on population or even where's the areas with bigger growth where we got the bigger problems. And guess what? Alberta, if anything, should possibly even have more than what our population represents rather than less. So yeah, that Dodge saying he's not responsible. Sorry, you jumped into it, Mr. Prime Minister.
Well, I guess he had other things on his mind. But it's I kind of read that first, Cory, and it almost went over the top of me because I thought, well, what else would you expect? But you're right, and Nixon is right. This is actually wrong. This is exactly how you deepen the divisions within a country. And when you're elected, you govern for the entire country. I remember when Harper got elected in 2006, that was the theme of his election night acceptance speech. And when he just told everybody, look, this is not a matter of the Conservatives winning. We are here to govern for everybody, whether they are Liberal, Conservative, or NDP. Remember that very clearly. And then you fast forward to 2023, is not this federal government here to govern on behalf of all Canadians? In which case, if you think that putting money into housing is a good idea, then you prorate it evenly around the country.
Well, and as you pointed out, to people like me who have been long advocating increased Western independence, if not full-out independence, and even flogging books to say as much, this makes my case easier. This makes it easier for me to bang that drum. This isn't equalization even. People always focus on equalization and they forget there's a lot of other areas where we get shorted actually in the West, and particularly in Alberta. They love using the transfer program as a way to preferentially fund some parts of the country and not others. It's just that equalization is the most blatant of it. But when we see these sorts of things exposed, hopefully some people start asking, well, what are some of those other transfers? Are we getting the same shake with the health transfers or the road infrastructure transfers?
Just more and more ammunition for Premier Smith and the eventual use of the Sovereignty Act, I guess, on something.
Well, creating some odd alliances. I mean, did you really think you'd see Jason Nixon and Mayor Sohi and Mayor Gondek all hand in hand on the same cause at any point short of a large natural disaster. They've unified some pretty disparate political personalities.
Politics made strange bedfellows, that's for sure.
One thing's for sure, Cory, anybody who has a house, has a home that they can afford, they need to be grateful. It is you always used to think, all these years, that buying a house was just what you did.
Yep.
And all of a sudden, it's starting to look like thanks to this government, this federal government, starting to look like a privilege. That is wrong.
It is.
So speaking of distractions, I will kind of round it out. I mean, we sort of alluded to it. We don't want to get too deep into it, but I think it's worth addressing. We should talk about it. It's an issue that's going to dominate some news and it's going to distract from other things. But it was announced just recently that the Prime Minister and his wife will now be separating. And, something I said on my show, and I said on social media too, as much as I'm a harsh, nasty guy on social media and things like that.
Mm-hmm.
It's still a family. They're still human. We can forget it at times. It's tough, and particularly on their kids. That I really feel for. I mean, when you're going through a family breakup like that, it's hard on a person as a kid even. But when my parents went through it, it was something. But at least it wasn't broadcast through the TV and the newspapers, and there was some such thing as social media. I guess just a lot of people happy to dance on Justin Trudeau's the grave of his relationship. But at the same time, people should temper it with a little.
Yeah, absolutely. As you say, this is a family. They're, a lot of people have been through it. I certainly have, and it leaves the emotional scars. And kids can be cruel, Cory. Let's not forget, kids can be cruel. And when the Trudeau kids go back to school in September, they're going to face a ton of trouble. So, yeah, remember the kids.
Yeah, indeed. And in the general confession, I too am a divorced man. There's very little that I can say. That I would, I can't condemn the man. It is one of the disappointing things that looking at some of the comments on that we get, a lot of people, how do I put it without offending our readership? Sometimes, what happens in a person's family, really anybody else's business. There's nothing here to take pleasure from. We will criticize Mr. Trudeau for his policies. And we will criticize him for the many hypocrisies that he has demonstrated in his public life and the private life that came before it. But on the matter of his marriage, I just wish him and Sophie and the kids, I wish them well.
And a parallel was sort of drawn, though. I mean, just of note, the last time a sitting prime minister actually experienced a divorce while in office was Pierre Trudeau, Prime Minister Justin Trudeau's father, of course, back in '77. But I believe it was the walk in the snow that same year.
Yes, later that year, '78, I think the divorce was finalized, and walk in the snow was later that year.
We can't at the same time. I mean, we can still be dignified and not dig into the reasoning and such, but we also discuss it does impact the mindset and possibly the choices of a prime minister. I mean, that could have been part of what influenced Pierre Trudeau when he made his mind up. And Justin Trudeau is having a tough time in government right now with this stacked on top of it. It may influence his career choices in the next few months.
Yeah, they could go either way. It could go either way. I think it could say, okay, now I'm going to focus on this instead of that, and focus on battling Polyev. Or, yeah, you're right. He could just do what his dad did and say, that's enough for me, and I'm out of here.
Yeah, it's just a factor that's happening. Again, we can't ignore that it's happening, but at the same time, it's speculating on the causes of the personal affairs or such is really not.
I just think we have to be a bit restrained about how we talk about it. But when you have something of that magnitude on your mind, it's got to affect your on-the-job performance. If that's what you're saying, I would agree with you.
Yeah, or even he might, as Dave said, it might improve his performance. He might focus. Different people react differently in stress, but I just think it might affect some of his personal decisions, perhaps, on how long he's going to stay as a prime minister, or possibly move along and see about different choices. But, well, we will watch and see. There's lots to watch, lots policy-wise, and we'll spend plenty of time dissecting and critiquing his choices when it comes to the governing of our country anyways. The governing of his household's up to him.
100%. Yes, well put.
So, all right. Well, Dave, Nigel, thank you very much for helping me through this. Another episode of The Pipeline. I think I'm 4 out of 5 of the last ones, Mr.
Yeah,
Gillibrand.
I think so, yeah.
Out of here. So,
Don't worry, winter's coming. He'll come back to
There's a
work
lot
in
of talk about
September.
taking you on steady.
oh, yes. We'll see what happens. All right. And thank you all for tuning in, guys. And I will leave off with nagging you just one more time. Help us stay independent. Help us keep rolling. Help us keep employing this great bunch of people we have here. Subscribe if you haven't already, and make sure all that stuff you hear on social media, but it's true. It works. It helps. Like us, on social media. Share it. Do all those things. And we can make sure we don't fall victim to these efforts through C18 and things like that to crush alternative and independent media like that. So, again, thank you for tuning in, and we will see you all again next week at this time.
The current Lethbridge feed grain prices are as follows. Cash barley is steady at $4.14. Feed wheat is down $2 at $4.10, while corn dropped $3 to $3.96. In the milling wheat markets, September Minneapolis futures are off 5.5 cents at $8.49 per bushel, with local hardwood spring bid for August movement at $10.45 per bushel delivered. Over to the canola market, nearby canola futures are lower $1.70 at $777.40 per ton, with delivered values for August movement at $17.28 per bushel. In the pulse markets, nearby red lentils are trading at 32 cents a pound, and yellow peas are at $11 per bushel. Looking at the cattle markets, August live cattle decreased $1.30 at $178.20 per hundredweight. For more information on pricing and picked up on-farm options, give me a call at 403-394-1711. I'm Vera Buziak at Marketplace Commodities, accurate real-time marketing information and pricing options.
Canadian Shooting Sports Association. Without the CSSA, our gun rights would have been taken long ago. These guys are on the front lines helping to draft smart and intelligent firearms regulations and legislation in Canada, and more importantly, educating the public about how we keep guns out of the hands of the wrong people. To become a member, it's absolutely worth every penny. You can become a Western Standard member for just $10 a month or